The dead of night in the depths of Alaska. A freight train advances through the black taiga, and beyond its windows it's 45 degrees below zero. A cold that turns rubber hard as old plastic and makes your bare hand stick to metal faster than you can pull it away. There are two in the cab. One drives the train, peering into the darkness where the headlights light up only 2 threads of rail. The other sits beside him, reclined in his seat with his eyes closed. He has to steal some rest before his turn at the controls comes. Behind a thin partition, the diesel roars. This diesel isn't shut off at the sidings or at the terminal station. In winter, they don't shut it off at all, not even when the train stands for hours. For 100 kilometers around, there's not a house, not a light, and these rails lead nowhere. The line is isolated from the rest of the world, and if something fails tonight, these two will fix it. There's no one else, and this cold has a favorite target. Not the people, it still has to reach them, nor even the diesel. Its target stretches outside along hundreds of meters of the train, and it strikes there all night, hour after hour, without the eyes noticing. The engineers know this enemy, and all their winter work revolves around it. Because if the cold gets ahead, thousands of tons will find out in the worst possible place, on a long grade. Today we'll live through this shift alongside the crew, hour after hour, from the handover of the locomotive in the darkness of the afternoon to the lights of the station at dawn. And you'll see that this cold doesn't strike where we usually expect. The locomotive in winter isn't shut off even at the stops. And what does the cold do to the machine over a night if it is shut off after all? How do 2 men manage to rest by turns in an iron box that rumbles, trembles, and never falls silent? Why does a train of thousands of tons break not with steel, but with ordinary air? And what happens to that air at -45? What will the crew do in the dead of night if the instruments show something abnormal? And that air at -45? The nearest help is hundreds of kilometers away. No one. We'll analyze it all in order, just as the night unfolds. Let's go. But before we climb into the cab, if you're interested in stories of how people work where nature itself is against them, subscribe to the channel right now so you don't miss the coming deep dives. And now, to the locomotive. 4 p.m. in winter. At this latitude, the sun sets long before the end of the workday, and the shift begins already in complete darkness. The station is lit by floodlights. Between the tracks, an icy fog drifts from the running machines. The crew, the engineer and his assistant, take over the freight locomotive. The work doesn't start in the cab, but by circling the machine on the outside with a flashlight in hand. They inspect the running gear, the brake shoes, the hoses that connect the cars, and the cold shows its character at once. At -45, metals stop being themselves. Rubber hardens and loses its flexibility, becoming something like dense plastic. The plastic itself turns brittle and can break from a blow that in summer wouldn't leave a trace. Metal draws the heat from your fingers so fast that small operations have to be done in short bursts, warming the hands and the gloves every couple of minutes. Even the snow underfoot sounds different. It doesn't crunch, but squeaks like styrofoam. That's why an inspection in this cold goes twice as slow as normal. You can't rush here. Everything the crew doesn't see now under the floodlights and near the warm depot will have to be searched for at night in the taiga, in the wind, by the light of a single flashlight. When the inspection is done, the crew climbs into the cab and receives the documents. Train weight, length of the train, the profile of the track ahead, where there are climbs, where there are long descents. These figures define the night. Departure time, locomotive en route, 2. 1 grade near the start, the second near dawn, already not far from the terminal station. Let's remember this. And all this time, while the people circled the machine and filled out papers, the locomotive was working. The diesel hummed softly at idle, expelling a column of white vapor into the still air. It hummed yesterday and the day before. In winter, they didn't shut it off even once, even when the machine stood for days waiting for work. From the outside, it looks like a waste. Why burn fuel for nothing? But behind this oddity hides a cold calculation, and to understand it, you have to know what happens to a shut-off diesel on the first freezing night. 7 p.m., the train prepares to go out onto the line. The diesel locomotive is a large diesel engine, and it's cooled by water that pumps circulate through a system of pipes and radiator sections. While the diesel runs, the water is hot and moving. If the machine is shut off in intense cold, a countdown begins. The water in the pipes cools and freezes, and the ice, as it freezes, expands with a force the metal can't withstand. It bursts the pipes, destroys radiator sections, ruins the water pumps. Railroaders call it defrosting, and it's capable of turning a locomotive in good condition, worth millions, into a dead block of iron in a single night. Add to this the batteries, which lose capacity in the cold. Starting a large engine, a cooled diesel, on weak batteries is a task at the limit of the possible, and sometimes beyond it. But the decisive factor here turns out to be something that has nothing to do with the machinery. It's geography. The Alaska Railroad, one of a kind, stretches about 760 kilometers, connecting the ports of the southern coast through Anchorage with Fairbanks in the interior of the continent, and is completely isolated. Its rails don't connect to the railway network of the rest of North America at any point. Between it and the continental tracks lie hundreds of kilometers of mountains and taiga where no line was ever laid. This line's link to the outside world is a single one, by sea. Machinery and cars arrive here by barge through the port, and this journey lasts not hours but weeks. From this follows a clear-cut conclusion. If a locomotive breaks down, it can't be quickly replaced. A new machine will arrive here by sea, and you'll have to wait weeks. Everything that can run is already on this line. Every locomotive in good condition is valuable, and losing one to save diesel is a luxury no one here can afford. That's why the calculation is unambiguous. The fuel burned at idle across all the winter stops costs infinitely less than an engine broken by ice. And the diesels roar without stopping at stations, at sidings, waiting for work. The train goes out onto the line. The headlights distinguish only the tracks from the darkness and the black wall of forest on the sides. The way is clear. The switches at the stations are heated so they don't freeze. And on this clear way, the train meets an unexpected obstacle. In winter, moose walk right out onto the tracks. It's easier to walk along them than to sink into the snow. For the Alaska Railroad, an old winter problem. The animal stands still before the headlights, and it's impossible to stop a heavy, loaded train in a short distance. No train can do it. And here it's time to answer honestly a question people normally don't ask themselves. How does this mass really break? What has to happen for thousands of tons, accelerated over the tracks, to stop obediently? The answer is hidden in a thin tube that runs the whole length of the train. Ahead is the first of the two grades of the route, and before it the engineer must carry out a check. In summer it would have lasted a couple of minutes and been a formality. Today it's the main ritual of the night. 10 p.m. The freight train stretches over hundreds of meters. The engineer is at the head, and the tail of the train is lost in the darkness. How do you stop cars from the cab that you can't reach with either a lever or a cable? The solution to this problem was devised more than a century ago, and turned out so successful that it works to this day on tracks all over the world. Through the whole train, from the locomotive to the last car, runs a tube, the brake line. Between the cars it's joined with flexible rubber hoses, and through this tube circulates ordinary compressed air, pumped by the locomotive's compressor. And here begins what breaks everyday logic. You'd think that to brake you have to apply pressure, push, press the shoes against the wheels. On a train it's all the opposite. As long as there's full pressure in the line, the brakes are released and the train rolls freely. Braking happens when the engineer releases part of the air and the pressure in the tube drops. It's the fall in pressure that gives the order to brake to every car at once. Why did the engineers invert the logic? Because of one terrible situation. Imagine the train breaks apart on the move, the coupling gives way, and the train splits into two parts. The rubber hoses between the cars come loose. The air leaves the line on its own, and the pressure falls without any order. And a fall in pressure, as we now know, means braking. Both halves of the train stop automatically. The detached tail won't roll downhill like an uncontrolled avalanche. It will stop on its own. The system is designed so that any failure causes it to stop, not lose its brakes, like a lock that, when it fails, locks shut instead of opening. For decades, this design was considered a model of reliability, but it has a weak point, and the cold strikes exactly there. The compressor draws in ordinary outside air, and all air contains moisture. In temperate climates, it condenses and is expelled outside. At -45, the moisture freezes inside the system. Frost and ice in the pipes, valves, and passages through which the air is supposed to flow. Ice plugs gradually form. At the same time, the rubber suffers. The connecting hoses between the cars themselves harden in the cold, lose their elasticity, and start leaking air. The valve seals stop sealing tightly for the same reason. And there's a third effect, the most insidious. The braking order doesn't travel through the train instantly. It propagates along the line as a wave from head to tail. In a long train, the rear cars receive it later, and in the cold, when air passes worse through the chilled system, this delay stretches even further. Add it all up and you get this. The system doesn't fail all at once, but gradually stops being predictable. The engineer can no longer say exactly at what distance his train will stop. For someone driving thousands of tons downhill, the loss of this certainty is more terrifying than a breakdown. A breakdown is visible, a blurred reserve of reliability is not. That's why all the winter work focuses on recovering that reserve. The condensate is regularly drained from the system, and the line is vented, keeping the moisture from accumulating and freezing. Before departure and before important grades, a full brake test is performed. The braking order is given, and the person walks the train, checking that the shoes have applied along the entire length and then release. In intense cold, the length and weight of trains are limited. A shorter train responds to orders more reliably than a long one, and the speed, where in summer you go faster, is reduced in winter. None of these actions looks like a feat, but they make the difference between a calm shift and the review of an incident. Today the test was passed. The brakes responded. The train made it through the grade without problems. The shoes released. Ahead is a siding where an oncoming train must be let through. The line is mostly single track, and the sidings are the only places where two trains can pass each other. Waiting on such a siding can last an hour or until midnight. The train stops. The diesel, of course, keeps running. The second grade is still very far off, several hours down the line, and it seems the hardest part is already behind them. Now begins that part of the shift that the service instructions don't write about. Trying to rest. 1 in the morning, the train stands at a junction. Hours of waiting ahead, and the crew must use them to rest, because they themselves will take the train onward, and no one will relieve them. There are no beds in the cab of a diesel locomotive. The only thing a man has is his work seat. He reclines it as far as possible, with a folded jacket under his head and his feet propped on the edge of the panel or on a bag. He rests without taking off his clothes, in jacket and boots. The call can come at any moment, and there won't be time to get ready. But even falling asleep in this position is a trial of its own. 3 things bother you at once, and each has its own physics. Noise. The locomotive never falls silent, not even while stopped. The fans that cool the equipment hum, and above all, every few minutes the compressor switches on, and it switches on with an abrupt, heavy crash that in the metal box of the cab resounds like a blow. The man who had dozed off startles every time, and in that crash there's a joyless irony. The device that won't let the crew rest is precisely the compressor that pumps air into the brake line all night. It rumbles precisely because it's fighting the leaks and the cold, replenishing the pressure. The worse the system holds air, the more often it switches on. An experienced engineer, even asleep, counts these switch-ons and by their frequency senses how the line is doing. The second nuisance is vibration. The running diesel transmits continuous vibration into the body. The seat trembles with the machine. You can only fall asleep with this vibration out of sheer exhaustion and wake with a heavy head as if you hadn't rested at all. The third is temperature. Inside the cab, it's distributed unevenly. From the engine compartment comes heat and stuffiness. From the floor, separated from the outside by a sheet of icy metal, the cold rises. The man sits between these zones, and one half of his body overheats while the other freezes. That's why in the railroader's bag there are earplugs. Without them, dozing off is out of the question. But even with them, the 2 crew members don't switch off at the same time. One sleeps in the reclined seat, the other watches the instruments in the radio. After a couple of hours, they take turns. You can't call this sleep even with great effort. A watch with closed eyes. The brain filters the sounds of the machine through the drowsiness, separating the familiar from the alarming. And here it's worth pausing on the question that arises on its own. Why are there 2 people in the cab if technically one man can operate the locomotive? The answer will come very soon. It will be given by the coldest and heaviest hour of this night. It's already approaching. The oncoming train passes. The dispatcher opens the line and the train sets off again toward where the second grade awaits it. 4:30 in the morning, the hours before dawn, the coldest time of day. The temperature drops to its minimum, and right now outside it's 45 degrees below zero, and in some spots more. At the same time, it's the worst hour for a human being. The body runs at its minimum, drowsiness sets in, reactions slow, attention scatters. Even a rested person at 4:30 in the morning thinks worse than during the day, and our crew hasn't rested. The train moves through the darkness, and less than an hour remains to the second grade, that long one before dawn. And right now the assistant notices that the pressure in the brake pipe is lower than it should be and keeps slowly dropping. Nothing explodes or thunders. The number on the gauge is simply not the right one. Somewhere in the train air is escaping, a frozen hose, a poorly adjusted valve, an iced-over connection. The compressor kicks in more and more, but it no longer manages to compensate for the leak. During the hours of waiting on the line, the cold has done its work. The first and obvious solution: you can't take on the grade with this pipe. The engineer stops the train on a level stretch while the pressure reserve is still enough to brake normally. He stops the train on his own initiative, not where the stop would happen out of control. And now the crew's situation reveals itself. You can't go on, there's a grade ahead, and guiding thousands of tons downhill without knowing at what distance they'll stop is the direct road to catastrophe. Nor can you stay stopped for long. The line is single, and a stalled train paralyzes traffic along the whole line. Behind and in the oncoming direction, other trains are already scheduled. Here, all the lines of this night converge. The cold has reached the system they built to be infallible. Help won't come from afar. The line is isolated. The nearest base is tens of kilometers away, and any replacement of equipment takes weeks to arrive by sea, and the decision must be made by two exhausted people at 4:30 in the morning. It's worth mentioning what automation does in these moments and what it can't do. On the locomotive, there's a system that monitors the engineer's condition. It periodically requires him to confirm that he's conscious by pressing a button or pedal. If it receives no response, it will brake the train itself. It's a technical answer to the fact that a human being in the dead of night stops being a reliable link, but this safeguard has a clear limit. It can stop the train if the engineer blacks out. It can't decide what to do afterward. Such decisions the technology doesn't make. They're entirely human. And here it becomes clear why there are two people in the cab. Not to relieve one another at the controls, but so that at 4:30 in the morning, a tired man looks at the same instruments and says whether he agrees or not. A tired man makes his mistakes in silence. Two tired men check each other. The crew decides not to approach the grade until the cause is found and eliminated. The report to the dispatcher goes out over the air. The work for which the rules were written begins. It's 5:30. There will be no feat and no epiphany. There will be a sequence of actions, each of them once performed, and which entered the instructions because someone once failed to follow it. First, the inspection. The man with the flashlight climbs down from the warm cab and walks along the train over frozen ballast in the darkness at -45, checking the connections between the cars one by one. He's looking for the air leak. In such cold, the frost gives away the flaw. There's a lot of walking. The train is long. The hands work in short intervals. A few minutes is work. Then the warming up. The point found is warmed, and the tightness of the connection is restored. The accumulated condensate is drained from the system. The line is purged. Then a mandatory repeat test of the brakes. Not a seems to hold, but a full check. Braking order. A pass along the train. Confirmation that the shoes have applied along the entire length and released as they should. Only after that the report to the dispatcher and permission to move. They approach the grade with the pressure restored and take it at reduced speed, slower than would be allowed in summer, with a margin that this night is more important than any timetable. This whole night, if you look back, rested on a few simple rules, and each has its price, paid once by someone's mistake. They don't shut off the diesel because the machine must stay alive, and here it can't be quickly replaced. The brakes are checked before the grade, not when doubts arise and it's already too late to doubt. There are two in the cab because a tired man makes his mistakes in silence at night. And in winter, the train is driven by the margin of reliability, not by the timetable, because a delay can be made up, but a train that's gone downhill can't be brought back. The sky finally begins to lighten. Ahead is that for which this night served. It's 7:30 in the morning. Dawn in Alaska in winter is late and reluctant. The sky slowly turns gray. The sun barely rises above the horizon, and on the horizon at last the lights of the station appear. The train arrives late, but it arrives whole, with the brakes in order, with the machine alive, with a crew falling off its feet from exhaustion, but which has carried the work through to the end. The locomotive is handed over to the next shift and left running. The diesel that has been humming all night will keep humming. We're used to thinking that in the north the enemy is the cold that drives off the warmth. It would have reached the people in hours. But while the crew kept the machine running, the battle was being fought on another front. The cold wasn't attacking bodies, but systems. It froze the moisture in the pipes, dried out the rubber of the joints, undermined the reserve of reliability millimeter by millimeter. And all the work of these two came down to replenishing the reserve, with the purge done back in the afternoon, with the brake test before the first grade, when everything was still in order, with the stop before the second, an hour before doubt could turn into disaster. Every hour of this shift was won in advance, before it became dangerous. The frost here doesn't ask whether you're tired or not. It methodically seeks the weak point in the metal, in the rubber, in the man. And it's not defeated by endurance and heroism, but by an order in which no point can be skipped. For the crew itself, none of this is exceptional. An ordinary winter shift, like all the others. And everything on the store shelves in deep Alaska got there by this one route. There simply are no others. There was a night like this on this road. A flashlight along the train and a brake test at -45. If you enjoyed getting a glimpse of this hidden world, where everyday things are held together by precise rules, hit like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the coming deep dives. What other machinery do you think works at its limit where we don't notice it at all? Maybe the next episode will be about that.